Hey guys, it's Psychodog, your resident D&D nerd, and today I'll be talking about one-shot villains. Now, this term, you might not recognize it, considering I did completely make it up, but here's my basic description for a one-shot villain. The idea behind a one-shot villain would be any villain that, in total, takes up less than one session's time. So let's imagine your average session is 6 hours. If there's a villain who is in your game for 5 hours, that's a one-shot villain to me. And it doesn't matter if it spans multiple, like, 2 campaigns, and it's the end of one campaign and the beginning of another, I could still consider that a one-shot villain. Now, the first thing, why use one-shot villains? Now, a big reason to use a one-shot villain would be if you have an already existing villain. Sometimes it's fun to have another villain so you can have the players have a big battle without having them kill your big villain. And sometimes it's useful to throw those in. First of all, if you have a giant overarching story with one big villain, you would want to have some one-shot villains or even some, like, 3 campaign villains to fill the void so the players can fight them and feel greatly achieved and get some good magic items from them. Another reason, one-shot villains can be really cool because, well, they're fun to run. It's fun to have a new personality in your game and not have to stick to it. And sometimes, non-one-shot villains can turn into one-shot villains if the players don't like them. For example, if you have a villain and you think, wow, the players are going to love him, everyone hates him, you can give him some cool scene and then have the players fight him and kill him and have some other villain behind the scenes the players might like more. Now, what are some of the cons of writing a one-shot villain? And by that I mean, what are some of the perceived cons that I'm going to try and sort of give remedies / re-explain. First possible reason that someone might not want to run a one-shot villain. You might think, well, it's going to get really villain of the weeky. Every time the heroes are going to be, well, who's the new villain? Oh, there's a new villain? Well, guess we got to kill him. But here's the thing. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's good when the heroes do start to think, villain of the week, for a split second. If you can maneuver your players' minds in a way to make them think it's one-shot villain time, and then the villain gets away, that's a pretty cool feeling, because not for the players, well, it can be for the players, because if he gets out in some amazing way that they didn't realize was an option, their minds are going to be blown. Now, another thing would be, you don't really get that aura of power from a one-shot villain. The reason people might say this is something like, oh, with a one-shot villain, if you have them too powerful, then you can't have them fight the players because you have to have more time for the players to get powerful. Or you could say something like, because with a non-one-shot villain, you can have it so if they are more powerful than the players innately, then the players go through a couple of sessions, get more powerful, get better items, and boom, they're ready to defeat them. But I don't think that's always true. And sometimes it's even more interesting to have a one-shot villain who does overpower the players. Here's an example. A Chimera. Chimeras are really interesting because, honestly, not sure if this is for everything, but the Chimera in my personal D&D game had the ability of dead magic. So 300-foot dead magic circle, like cube. So in this cube, players can't use magic. No one can. So it makes a really interesting thing when you have a Chimera jump out of the forest, slash my entire party, by my entire party, I mean my DM's entire party off a cliff, and have us scramble, because my party is consistently made of magic users. So basically the idea is, we're falling through a cliff. I try and cast Feather Falling. Nothing happens. The wizard tries to cast Tentacles. Sorry, I forgot the name. But Tentacles, nothing happens. Avard Black Tentacles. And eventually we just hit the ground, and there's a nice moment of, whoa, how the heck did he do that, and how are we going to beat him? Another cool thing, with this, you're able to tie someone else in, because the reason a one-shot villain is powerful is very different from the reason a multiple session villain would be powerful. A multiple session villain would be powerful because they're innately more powerful than the party, and if we were to give them player class levels, they would be higher level. But a one-shot villain is powerful because of one power they can draw on. Like, for example, this Chimera had the power of the Dead Magic Cube, and the thing is, that also gives an obvious weak point. If the players can find a way to disable that, then they can fight him, and it'll be a pretty fair fight, as long as you have good enough magic for him. So the example for this was actually really interesting. The DM was able to brilliantly tie in another villain. He was able to say, basically, we had to go to a specific dungeon to get a scale that would stop this power that the Chimera had. So he was able to tie in a long-term villain, which is the snake that can't die, basically, who's super powerful, and he was able to have a defender of the weapon that would then kill the one-shot villain. So it was basically a process of, you take down this villain, and it really works. It really only works if, one, the villain will run away, or two, the villain can, like, respawn, like the snake could. So, you defeat that villain, then you get to get the item to defeat the other villain. Which makes for a pretty cool structure, because then you have to get through a trial to get the item to defeat the trial. And in general, one-shot villains, I feel like a lot of the time, people might not account for them, specifically DMs, because sometimes a DM can have a brilliant story, like an amazing story, but they only have like 4 villains, and sure, that's pretty great, that'll work, but the thing is, a lot of time it's great to have multiple villains running, because it can be a variety. For example, there's a common trope of, when there's a big empty room, players can assume, oh, there's going to be a villain encounter in here, or if there's a room with swords on the walls, or some really innate decoration, players can assume a villain's going to be in here. But the thing is, if you have multiple villains to choose from, like a one-shot villain that you just introduced this campaign, and then a long-term villain, and like a sort of long-term villain, and the big bad, and all that, and like the big bad's minions and stuff, you really have some variety, because the players, sure, they know a boss is going to be in here, but they don't know what boss. They don't know if it's going to be your Chimera, or your big bad of the entire thing, and they're going to get swamped, or this is going to be the big death for that Chimera I mentioned, the one-shot. It could be anything, and it really varies. Now, we're getting on to something very special. Might not want to use this skill too innately, and it's a lot more easy. Warning, it's a lot more easy to know that this skill exists than it is to use it. Now, this is the skill of how to know if a villain is a one-shot villain. Now, sure, this isn't very useful, considering it doesn't really matter, because if it's a one-shot villain, he's probably dead before you figure this out, but still. Basic traits of a one-shot villain. First of all, like I said, one power they can rely on as a very powerful thing that you're going to use an artifact to disable. 2, nondescript name. For example, one villain in my game was Silverscale. So that's a specific name, because it's a Dragonborn called Silverscale. But then there was a one-shot villain called Chromatic Knight. And that's not a specific name, it's just describing his occupation, Chromatic Knight. This is an easy thing to point out just in the moment, just because you can easily see, oh, Chromatic Knight, Silverscale, difference. Now, the big thing about a one-shot villain is, if you have a long-term villain and your players somehow kill him, that's going to mess up your entire story DMs. That's going to mess up your entire thing, and you're going to have to revamp. But if you have a one-shot villain, and the players kill him before they're supposed to, then that's just cool, because it shows you, wow, these guys are powerful, and it's a good scale, but it doesn't really mess with your story, because it's just a one-shot villain. Well, I guess I'll be closing out the video here. I'm honestly not sure if it was short or long. Either way, I'm sorry. Peace.